Hello everybody, welcome to my lecture about natural language processing as well as AI system for. This is Youngtae Lim from MLP Lab. Today we're gonna talk about the first session of Transformer. Transformer is really famous for everybody, so probably you're gonna be heard this kind of techniques as well as the sub models such that BERT and GPT-like models. That means Transformer is really important for recent deep learning era, not just for natural language processing, but also computer vision. Then let's dive into what is the meaning of Transformer and what's the structure of it has. Today we're going to discuss about two different sections. The first section is the overall introduction of Transformer. And the Transformer has two different parts. The first one is an encoder and the other is a decoder. So we're going to briefly look over what is the differences between encoder and decoder structure. And the second topic of this slide is about Transformer-Encoder. As I mentioned that encoder consists of two different parts, encoder and decoder. Just for this week, I'm just want to tell you that the details about encoder and its structure. There are four different parts just for encoder. The first one is self-attention, the other is multi-head attention and positional encoding, and add up as well as normalization part. Then let's look over the introduction of Transformer. Okay, before we deep dive into the structure of a Transformer, we should understand encoder-decoder structure because Transformer is one of the subset of encoder-decoder structure. The very first encoder-decoder model was proposed in autoencoder paper. The autoencoder is a kind of structure of deep learning, and it leverages bottleneck to put representations into latent space. Here is an example of autoencoder. It consists of three different type of layers. The first layer is input layer. Typically, input layer is probably the sequence of data, such as natural language. For example, I have a dream. Then the other two layers is about the output layer as well as latent representation. As we discussed in the definition of autoencoder, it has a kind of bottleneck layer to put representations. So it means that this bottleneck contains all the representation for the input sentence. In this structure, we can say that, okay, this one is a kind of bottleneck layer. It compresses the information in the input data and then restore it looking for the most important features. So this layer contains all the information from the input sentence, and as you can see that the dimensionality of this middle layer is smaller than the previous latent representation and also the input layer. So it means that it compresses, the middle part should be compressed because of the latent space is very small just for this middle of layer. And then the target of this system is to restore of its input data. So the input layer should be predict the sentence I have a dream. So based on this sentence, I have a dream. If the system predicts the same sentence, then probably in the middle of the layer should have memorized the most important key features. Is that right? Can you understand about this? And finally, this very small dimension stores the most important features. So we are using this representation to classify a kind of classification task, or we can extract this this bottleneck layer to generate a kind of question answering system and summarization so far, because this latent space stored all the information, all the important information from the sentence. And then let's just imagine that if we do this kind of job just for tons of sentences to restore the input from the output, then it contains a lot of information with the small number of dimensions, right? That's the key factor of encoder-decoder structure, and especially for autoencoder. Okay, before we discuss about autoencoder, and it has been structured on encoder-decoder structure, and then just researchers tried to apply this encoder-decoder model with ONN. Here is some example of the ONN based encoder-decoder model. This is about using ONNs to represent text in latent space. It's almost the same with the autoencoder structures, but just for encoder part, it is using RNN cells, not that kind of ANN or fifth word neural network. But in this case, the information bottleneck has occurred because, those parts, because of the use of the last hidden state. As you can see that the transformers are great, and this sentence has been stored at the last hidden layer of RNN, and then we just take this last hidden layer as the states and as the latent state, and as well as we can say that bottleneck representation, and then take this bottleneck representation into decoder, and decoder tried to restore the same sentence, transformer blah 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 blah, or decoder can be trained for a specific purpose such as machine translation or summarization task. Okay, as I mentioned that the RNN based encoder decoder has some limitation because it has been used just for last hidden layer. Then to solve this kind of problem, we simply use all the hidden layer from the RNN, right? So researchers try to use all the hidden layer by using attention mechanism. Attention mechanism is about to taking into account all the previous hidden states to calculate a time step t. Then this time step t feed it into another decoder RNN cell as its input. So it takes into account all the information from the encoder layer, and then generate a new tokens just for machine translation or summarization onto encoder decoder structure. So it solves information bottlenecks here because of taking into account all the hidden states. But still, we got a problem about this structure is not taking into account parallelized across input sequences. Then why RNN based encoder decoder model does not take into account parallelism? Here is an example. If we use an RNN model, the structure of RNN is like this. It has the hidden layer based on timestamp such that HT plus 1 and HT plus 2 and HT. In order to calculate the value of HT plus 1, we should calculate HT before. Is that right? Yeah, definitely. This makes non-parallelized across input sequences because we should calculate the previous hidden states. But if we don't use all NN based structures, then we can avoid this kind of problem. So people just try to use only attention mechanisms to encode its text. So encoder decoder model based on transformer has been proposed in 2017. This structure is only using the attention to represent text in latent space. So from the text, transformers are great. It is fed into just several attention layer and then feed it into fully connected layer and then just feed decoder layer, and as well as the decoder block has been structured with only attention models. So it's really powerful and it resolves information bottleneck as well as parallelize across input sequences. We're gonna discuss this structure today, and also we're gonna look over what is the difference between encoder and decoder structure. So in summary, encoder decoder structure is as below. This is kind of a typical machine translation task. ACL에 논문 쓰고 싶어요 can be translated to I want to publish the paper on the ACL. And here in the middle of the input and output there is a representation layer. As I mentioned, that this is a kind of bottleneck layer from autoencoder. But in case if we just use transformer encoder and decoder structures, we can use the same number of dimensions just for representation layers, such that we don't need to use smaller size of representation layers. So we can just put 784 dimension of the first hidden layer, and as well as with the 784 dimension of hidden layer 2 and hidden layer 3 is almost the same. So we don't need to minimize our dimensionality to represent our middle of representation. It is possible by using attention structures. And as I mentioned, that the size of input and output embedding are the same size, and since it encodes by self-attention, it does not seem to require a bottleneck. Okay, on the left is the structure of the very simple encoder-decoder model we introduced earlier. I mean this part. And then if we zoom in on that model, we see a very complex transformer structure that looks like this. Oh, but don't be panicked. Let's conquer them one by one. As you can see that there are two different encoder-decoder part just for a simple transformer structure. Today we're gonna study about just only this encoder model. So I mean, you just need to understand what's the input of the transformer as well as the positional encoding and method of the input embedding, as well as this multi-head attention with feed-forward neural network structure. Okay, let's deep dive into this one. As I mentioned that there is a input layer. Just for this input layer, we tokenize the input sentence through a tokenizer. So we should annotate this part, tokenizer, and it converts to a token embedding and combine the positional embedding. I mean, this one is positional embedding. So based on the tokenization with the word embedding as well as the positional encoding, we just add those two different embedding. I mean, input embedding as well as positional embedding. Then it turns out the final integrated word embedding. And then the encoder and decoder consists of a stack of encoder layers and as well as decoder layers. Here you can see that n multiply blah blah. It denotes that we're gonna build our transformer structure with this encoder block multiply 5, such that 5 different type of encoder block has been aligned. So it means that we got 5 different the same encoder structure over this transformer encoder. It's kind of similar to stack of convolutional layer in computer vision. And then the output of the encoder, I mean this one, here this line, feed it into one of the decoder block. This encoder result is injected into each decoder layer, and the decoder predicts the next most likely token in the sequence, predicts the EOS token, or repeat until the maximum length is reached. So in a nutshell, this decoder block feeded as the input of this decoder block is two different parts. The first part is its sequence of decoder input and as well as the output of encoder layer, like this. So as you can see that from the encoder result, it branches out two different branch, and from the input of decoder layer, it branches just only one single branch here. So by combining the result of the encoder representation as well as decoder representation, we can calculate the unified representation, both encoder and decoder, and try to feed into feed-forward neural network and as well as the linear layer as a kind of classifier. In natural language generation task, this system tries to predict next token, such that the input token is what is the most beautiful, what kind of movie do you like, then the output can be the first token of the output, possibly I, and then the I also feed it into output at the timestamp of t+1. Then the system tries to predict the next token I like. Batman Begins so far. This is whole procedure of encoder-decoder model. This transformer architecture is designed for sequence-to-sequence operation, but the encoder and decoder blocks are independent model. So later on, we're gonna discuss about the use of encoder block as well as use of decoder block at the same time. Okay, as I mentioned in the previous slide, a transformer is basically two different parts. The first one is encoder and the other is decoder. And encoder block has been used to train BERT-like models, and this BERT-like model has been applied for question answering system and as well as text classification and sentiment analysis. I mean, this text classification include sentiment analysis and morphological analysis and dependency parsing and question answering and so on. There are tons of natural language processing application has been used BERT-Street models. And these BERT-Street models are using only encoder blocks. And just for decoder block, it's kind of famous recently. It has been used just for GPT-like models, and basically GPT-like models is generative models, so it has been applied for chatbot and natural language generation system or information extraction or question answering and ChatGPT and Bard and so forth. As well, there are some systems and some pre-trained model that has been applied not only encoder but also decoder block as well. So it means that those kind of encoder decoder block model uses whole transformer. This model typically uses this model has been applied just for machine translation and summarization, and there are two representative models named BART and T5. Probably later on we're gonna discuss about the structure of T5 and BART. But just for today, we're gonna talk about encoder block. Okay, this is end of the introduction of transformer. From now this on, we're gonna study about the transformer encoder. There are 4 different parts: self-attention, multi-head attention, positional encoding, normalization. Okay, then let's look at the self-attention part first. Okay, then let's look over the structure of encoder model of a transformer. Here is a visualized example of encoder. As you can see that the input is typically a sentence, and then this sentence feeded into the first number of encoder. So there are n number of encoders has been structured in this format. It means that our encoder consists of the number of n encoder structures as a stacked structure. And the first encoder, encoder number 1, this one, receives the sentence as input. And the next encoder takes the output of the previous encoder. And just one encoder consists of this kind of whole structures. And this structure shows that there is a multi-head attention layer as well as add and normalization layer and feed-forward layer as well as add and normalization. So it means that there are 4 different software layers on the just for an encoder. Those one. Okay. Then the next step is that we just need to study about what is the meaning of multi-head attention. This part first.